Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad you're all here. My late partner, Jeff Gillenkirk, met Connie King, the subject of this one-woman play, when he and his great friend James Motlow were working on their book about the Delta town of Locke called Bitter Melon. Over the years, Jeff and Connie became good friends, and he spent many hours listening to her tell him about her extraordinary life. Jeff strongly believed in how much Connie's story mattered, that it deserved to be heard and to be remembered, which is why he wrote this play. In it, he did his best to capture her story, her history, her voice, and her heart. Just before Jeff died unexpectedly in November, he got news that Nancy Wong and Ethnotech were interested in presenting the play as part of the San Francisco International Arts Festival. He was thrilled. Today, we're presenting the play for the first time as a staged reading because Jeff didn't have the chance to work with Nancy on the stage. It's still very much a work in progress, and we ask for your understanding about that. But our hope is that it will be developed and can grow into a full-fledged production one day. After the reading, we will have a short panel discussion, so I hope you can stay for that. Jeff would have wanted so much to be here today to see this, but the next best thing is that you are all here bearing witness to the story of Connie King. Thank you. And now, 10,000 Steps, One Woman's Insistence on the American Dream.
One guy, 10,000 steps. Walk 10,000 steps every day, and you live forever. That's what my doctor says, Dr. Cole. 8 or 9 times around town. That's what it takes. 8 or 9 times every day. Sometimes late at night. People say, Connie, don't you ever sleep? I never sleep good. Sometimes I walk around town all night. There's too much to do, even now. 483, 484, 85, 86. Did you know that the first Chinese woman in America got put in a museum in New York City? They wanted to show people how exotic and different Chinese people were. She had bound feet. All the rich women had bound feet. The more valuable you were, the more they wanted to control you. Look at this. So they bind your feet. They do it when you're a young girl. It was supposed to help you find a better husband, a richer one at least. They wrapped your feet with bandages so tight that the arches break, the toes bend back towards the heel, and the whole foot shrinks to just a few inches. Somehow, this was supposed to make you more beautiful, more desirable. Afa Moy. Afa Moy was her name, and she spent 2 years in that New York museum. That was almost 200 years ago. But things don't change much. I was with a friend, Lillian Chan, one time up in Sacramento, and she was changing her little girl's diaper. A Caucasian woman came up to her to watch and said she was surprised because she thought our vaginas went the other way, horizontal. I looked at her for about a minute, and then I said, "It's true." But not until puberty. Then it switches. Her eyes got all big. 722, 723, 724. Locke. I didn't want to live in Locke at first. It was such a poor place, and you couldn't own the land. You know about the Alien Act, right? 1913? California law. Chinese, Japanese can't own land. But I'm American, born in Isleton, just 10 miles away. So, when I married Tom, I went across the river to see if we could buy a house. There were 3 houses for sale. I told Tom I liked the one in the middle. So we stop, I knock on the front door, this man opens the door and says, "What do you want?" I said, "I saw a sign in your front yard that your house is for sale and I'm interested. Can you show it to me?" And he said, "By any chance are you Chinese?" And I said, "Yes, I'm proud to be Chinese. Why?" "Well, if you're Chinese, I can't sell you the house." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you're Chinese." This land's not your land, this land's not my land. From California to the New York Island, to the West Redwood Forest, to the Gulf Stream waters. Someday this land's for you and me.
A strong vertical beam of white light shines on the bench beside her.
My brother Bill and I used to sing that song. He got drafted in 1944, wasn't even out of high school yet. #1 in his class. Then he took some special test, and the Army sent him to MIT. He was the only Asian there. They sent him over just in time for the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. Lucky he survived that. He fought the whole time. And when he got home, he couldn't even own the land he fought for. I promised my brother and my husband and all the people who lived here that I would get the land for us. Nobody thought a Chinese woman could do that, but that was my #1 goal. They should have sold that house to me in the first place. Would have made everything a lot easier for everybody. As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw before me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. Someday this land's for you and me.
Beam of light on bench evaporates. Stage goes dark. Mama?
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 Mama? My father. He came over in 1886, 4 years after the Exclusion Act. We were special, you see. The only people excluded from America. He tried to buy a piece of land, and of course, New Lorna Creek, and of course they refused to sell it to him because he was Chinese. He went to work as a farm laborer, picking sugar beets down near Rio Vista. He ate sugar beets and potatoes to save money, but this was how he started a grocery store here in Isleton. Later, he went back to China and arranged to import food. He also arranged to marry my mom. She described it a number of times. She was very talkative. Some say, I take after her. She met Father for the first time on her wedding day. The wedding night was in Grandma's home. In the Chinese family of that time, everybody slept in one big room. And the only privacy you had was a mosquito net around every bed. So, Mama's bed, her wedding bed, was right next to her mother-in-law. She didn't talk much about how that went. My mom wasn't able to come over until 1922. My brother Howard was already 14. Another brother died on the way on Angel Island, where they held my mom for 3 months. I was born the following year in 1923. 3 years later, Isleton's Chinatown burned down. We lost everything. My father built a new home in Isleton with money he had to borrow. He sharecropped on a ranch near Cortland. He bought 2 horses to pull the plow, a truck to haul farm things, and hired a bunch of workers. My father had great hopes of performing a miracle and getting rich. But he had no money of his own to start. Everything he did was on borrowed money. I remember seeing how hard and how long my father and mother worked from daybreak into the night. I remember my mother carrying my baby sister on her back, helping my father in the orchards. And then the Depression came. We lost everything again. So my father went back to the fields, picking fruit and pruning trees. They only make 25 cents an hour, 35 cents if you're white. Mama was working in the canneries. That's the only job she could get because she don't speak English. All the sorters were Chinese. They have a spring season and a summer season, and they have a fall season. And they all work together. That's the only way they can support and raise their families, year after year after year.
Mama? Mama?
Mama!
Mama?
You know, my mother came home maybe once a month to check on us. Sometimes we didn't have any money, so we all go to bed without food. When I was only 10 years old, I had to take care of my brothers and sister. I cooked for them, I cleaned house, I washed clothes, I packed their lunch, and make sure they go to school. Segregated school. We couldn't go to school with the white children, so the Filipino, the black children, the Japanese, and the Chinese all go to one school. And across the way is the white school. It's still standing in Isleton right now. Big, beautiful building with shrubs and a lawn. The Oriental School, we called it the Oriental School, was nothing but a gray building and no lawn, just gravel all around. We didn't understand why we couldn't go to school with the white children. I played with them after school. In fact, I used to pick cucumbers and sell them to the white homes. Get a few cents to buy a loaf of bread to take home. 122, 23, 24. We weren't supposed to speak Chinese, English only. One time, my brother Bill had to stay after school because he wrote the Pledge of Allegiance wrong. He misspelled indivisible. He wrote, "One nation, invisible." So, they kept him after school and made him write the Pledge of Allegiance 50 times. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I was pretty upset, but I couldn't say anything. We learned early on when to talk and when not to. Yeah? Chinese people had to stand up for each other as best we could. All we had was each other.
She reaches into her pocket and unfolds a well-worn piece of paper.
Many years later, my brother Bill wrote this about our childhood. It was late in the afternoon of 1933. The evening shadows had fallen early and it had gotten very cold. On this particular day, both our parents had to be away from home, earning a few dollars to try and sustain their family. The only light we had in the living room was a 25-watt bulb hanging on a double-strand wire from the ceiling, casting a dim, shadowy pattern onto the narrow kitchen floor through an open doorway. Connie, age 10, had been placed in charge of 3 siblings, Warren 7, May 6, and me, Bill, 9 years old. Our 8-year-old brother had already perished from the flu of 1927. There was a kerosene heater that we could afford to use only for warming the bedroom before bedtime. We were all becoming hungry and cold, and we started whimpering for Mama, except for Connie. She boiled a small pan of water and poured the hot water into 4 cups. She then put 1 saltine cracker into each cup, sprinkled a bit of sugar. She stirred each cup. Then she handed it gently to each of us, with a warning to grab the cup firmly with both hands. She said the cup is to warm our hands and the cracker soup to warm our stomach. The 4 of us stood facing one another in the dark kitchen and drank our cracker soup. In a few minutes, our cups were empty, but still warm. Connie then taught us 2 songs she had learned from Sunday school, Jesus Loves Me and This Is My Father's World. The 4 of us sang and sang until our cups turned cold and we had gotten sleepy. Connie then lit the kerosene heater to warm the 1 bedroom where our entire family slept in winter to stay warm. One by one, she helped us clean up and put us to bed. In the mornings, she would wake us up and get us dressed. She would boil some water to make a pot of tea. That was our breakfast. Then she made our school lunch consisting of 1 slice of white bread dusted with a sprinkle of sugar, each folded in half and put into a paper bag. Then we all walked to school together.
She carefully folds the paper and places it back into her pocket.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. We are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. You know, people always ask me, Connie, what kind of dreams did you have growing up? Chinese girl born in Isleton. I wasn't supposed to be anybody. I was just happy to get my next meal. But one time things got so bad that my mother gave my sister to a neighbor. Somebody who can feed and buy clothes for her, take care of her. My father was working on a ranch that day, and when he came back, he got so mad. He went right over and took my sister back. We're a family, he said. We'll get through this together. So when I was 12, I went to work in a restaurant next door. I did other odd jobs around town, babysitting and house cleaning. We needed each nickel. My father spoke a little English, so he got a job as a cook in an Isleton casino. They fed him for free, and he got leftovers for us. Vegetables mostly. We rarely got any meat. We went around the back of the casino after dark so no one would see us. And he'd hand a pot of food through the back door. That's how we survived. That's what gave us strength. That and holding on to each other. And that summer, I went to work in the asparagus cannery in Isleton. I never forget that day we switched to tomatoes. They had a big, huge tub. And they took the tomatoes out for us to peel, and the guy stepped on something. And he fell in there and everyone was screaming that he died in the hot, boiling water. It was right near me. I saw the whole thing. He had to close the cannery. And the next day I couldn't go to work. I can still see it right now, what happened. And our Chinese family has a long history, all the way back to Confucius. Not sure how Mrs. Confucius had anything to say about things. You see, a Chinese woman's life revolves around men. That's what we learn. Before you're married, you obey your father and your elder brother. When you're married, you obey your husband and take care of your mother-in-law. And when you're a widow, you obey your son. That's it. That's your life. But I did have a dream back then. I wanted to be a stenographer and live in Sacramento, the big city. I was smart and pretty, and Sacramento was only 45 minutes by train away. But my parents, they had other plans. They couldn't afford to feed me anymore, so they arranged for me to be married. You see, my brother, Bill, he got a job in a restaurant in Sacramento. He was only 14 and went to school up there as well. He lived in the basement of the restaurant and got up at 5 o'clock every day and cleaned and washed. And then he went to school. And then he came back at 3 and worked until midnight. And still, he graduated #1 in his class. I was so proud of him. I bought him his first suit for graduation. $25 for a wool suit. It was 100 degrees on graduation day, but at least he looked good. Anyway, the man my parents picked for me was a cook at the J.P. Cook, the restaurant where my brother worked. I was 16, he was 40. We got married up in Reno. My brother Bill was a witness. My husband told my family he would take care of me and help my mother raise my brothers and sisters. But as soon as we got married, he moved me down to Los Angeles. He opened a restaurant in Long Beach, and it was really hard for me. I had never been outside of the Delta. And then he was a very jealous person. He drank a lot, and when he came home, he would beat me. If I talk to a man, for example, our next door neighbor, he thinks there's something going on. I'm a very friendly person to everybody, so I got abused very badly. And Chinese women don't leave marriages, but I couldn't take it. I ran away 3 times, but my mother always said, "You go back. You have to go back." Marriage was marriage. I was supposed to put up with it. That was Confucius' law. I swear to God, this is the way it was. Women have no right to divorce or remarry if she was happy in the arranged marriage, unless the husband gives permission. Men could divorce a woman for all kinds of reasons: adultery, disobedience to parents-in-law, not giving birth to a son, jealousy of his attention to the other wives, talkativeness, thievery, and leprosy. But women, no divorce without her husband's consent, even if he dies. I don't know how much more to tell you. I have to be careful because everything about Chinese is family. But one time, after I left, maybe the 4th or 5th time, he was so mad, he took a hammer and he broke all my toes. Oh. see, even now, depending on the weather, I walk funny. My toes are all crooked. They never healed right. He never let me go to a doctor. I never showed them to anybody. I was too ashamed. Well, I left again as soon as I could, back to Isleton. But this time my brother Bill, he was home from the war by then, and I told him what was going on. So when my husband came to get me this time, Bill was cleaning his rifles he brought back from the war. He told my husband to go away. And when my husband threatened him, he picked up one of the rifles and pointed it at him. That was the last time I saw him. Until I went down to Long Beach when he was dying. I tried to do what I could to comfort him. He used to be my husband, after all. Ah, Jesus loves me still today, walking with me on my way, wanting as a friend to give light and love to all who live. 4,485, 4,486, 87. So I was the first Chinese woman to get divorced in Delta, which was a big deal. I was pointed at and talked about, but that was nothing compared to what I went through in my marriage. But that's why I took so long to get married again. I never dated anybody after my divorce. I was too nervous. Well, I met Tom, my second husband, at a New Year's party at Sacramento, American Legion dance. We didn't dance. I never learned how to, but that's another story. I went out with him finally, but didn't marry him for 3 years. Now, I wasn't sure about getting married again, so it took me 3 years to make up my mind. Well, this one was in Reno, too. In 1948, I was 25. Now, I told you before, I didn't want to live in Locke. I wasn't born here. I wasn't in the right group. Locke was the Chunsan village, Isleton was Seyap. Two places very close to each other in China, but over the mountains. And everybody acts like you're some kind of stranger. And every family has its own association. The Wong family, Ang family, Lees, Chans, Chans, Fongs. I was a Tom. But my father, he came over with somebody else's name. That was the only way a lot of Chinese got through the Exclusion Act. But everybody still gets excited about their family name, even if it's not their own. Even if it's someone else's. So I became a king. That's not even a Chinese name. My husband's real name was Joe. But his grandfather knew some English, so they called him King. His father owned all the slot machines in the Delta, and stored them upstairs in a garage, and that's where I ended up living. I converted that storage room into 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, and a downstairs family room, living room, and kitchen. That was our home, a 3-car garage. Tom said, "It will only be for a little while, until we found our own place." I ended up living there 58 years. Well, the first thing that happened, Tommy's mother got sick. Remember those rules for Chinese women and Chinese wives? First job is to take care of your husband. Second job, take care of your mother-in-law. She never said a nice thing to me in my life. She didn't want her son to marry a tainted woman, a divorced woman. But every day I feed her, and I bathe her, I make sure her medication is set out. She never said thank you once. Or talked to my daughter. My daughter's from another marriage, so she didn't count. She never talked to her, not once. And my husband never said anything. I don't know why. Maybe he was too busy. You know, after the war, he was a radio repairman. He fixed up radios in the front room of his family's house. Always had the radios tuned to the station in Sacramento. And when television came along, he had a lot of trouble working on them. They were too heavy. He was convinced that TV was never going to catch on. So he ignored it and waited for it to go away. Like Confucius said, men are the smart ones, right? This land's not your land. This land's not my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, none of this land is for you and me. The Locke family owned the land our town was on. They needed somebody who spoke Chinese to collect ground rent, so I taught Clay Locke into letting me do it. I went door to door every month to collect rent. $7.50 for a house a month, $10 for a business. I got to know everybody in every building, see how they live, find out when they're out of money, when they're sick or drunk or depressed and can't get out of bed. Whitehall. She used to tell the story about a man who came over with what he thought was a really clever way to make money. He had trained a flea who could pull a little cart. He was sure people would say, "Oh, how interesting, oh, how clever you are." He would become famous as the Chinese man who trained a flea. But when he got to customs, the officials asked him what he brought in. He told them he had nothing but a flea that could pull a cart. And the officials said, "What? You're trying to bring a flea into the United States?" They wouldn't let him ashore. Nothing of any value was ever allowed, not even a flea. You know, there were all kinds of laws against us. Chinese Exclusion Act, No Marry a White Person Act, No Chinese a woman come to America Act, No Chinese can vote Act, No Chinese can testify in court Act. They were really afraid of us for some reason. The 4,999, 5,000. Locke. I married a man who was raised here, but I also married a town. The longer I lived here, the more I grew to love it. This was a wide open, crazy place. Gambling houses, whore houses, speakeasies, opium dens. The Sacramento bee called it the Monte Carlo of California. That's what all the whites want to know about when they come here. Just about every building on Main Street had some kind of vice. None of the Chinese people want to talk about that, but that was the way it was. What else were we supposed to do? Chinese couldn't vote, couldn't work for corporations, couldn't work for the government, couldn't own land. They had to make a living somehow. Some of the biggest crooks were Caucasians. George Locke was arrested for recruiting girls for the whorehouses in town. And the sheriff and the gambling hall owners were good friends. And the DA. Why, every Christmas, they got little red envelopes from the gambling halls. And they don't bother anybody. People always want to know, what did Locke look like on a Saturday night? When I got here in 1949, oh, everything was still going on. 300-400 people living in town, hundreds more coming in from ranches every weekend. This was the place to be if you were Chinese. Restaurants, grocery store, Daofu and custard shop, shoe repair, barber shop, dentist office, restaurant, grocery store, herbalist, dentist office, woo hall, bakery, laundry, gambling halls, whorehouses, a Baptist church, and a meeting house for the men who ran the town. Everybody wants to come to see Locke now because it's all Chinese. The last all-Chinese town in America. Every Monday I go door to door and collect the rent. Here's Yun Chong Market. It's empty now. One of the men who worked here, Francis Chen, he hung himself. I don't know why. Life here was really hard for some of these men. It was really hard to take. I worked there as a clerk, only woman who ever worked there. One day I came in, and George Marr told me I'd quit. I didn't quit. Turns out my husband had come in earlier that day and said, Connie's quitting. I didn't quit. He made me quit. And they let him make me. Didn't want me to work. Well, I finally finished taking care of my mother-in-law. She died. Then after I raised my children and sent them to school, I set some goals for myself. I think I earned the right to do that. Number one goal, own the land beneath my house. Number two, honor the Chinese who built the railroads and the levees and created the farmland in California. Number three, be able to call myself an artist. We started an art co-op from over in Walnut Grove, 15 ladies and myself. Then we moved here and opened the River Road Gallery. This is my second home for 25 years. We featured artists from all over Sacramento, Bay Area, and Delta, including me. I think I sold 40 to 50 paintings over the years. So I got to call myself an artist and help lots of other people too. A friend would take me to a studio in Sacramento every Thursday afternoon. Everyone was so generous and so open. I lived with men all closed off. This was just the opposite. Warm and colorful and supportive. I learned how to do watercolors. I loved how much you could say without even talking. You know, you have a beautiful flower in your garden and it dries up and it dies. But if you draw it first or make a watercolor, you make it last forever. Just the beauty, not the pain. You can make the beauty last forever. I was seeing a therapist then in Sacramento because my marriage was so bad. My second marriage, that one too. I took care of my husband and his father, then my mother-in-law. That's what a Chinese wife does, take care of the family. But my husband was very depressed himself. It was hard being a Chinese man. It was hard to get respect, but he didn't give respect either. I cooked a fresh meal every night for him. We ate at the same time every night because he was so picky. He would not eat. He would eat only my food. We never went to anyone else's house. He would never do it. Not that he was happy with everything at home. Well, one day, I made a winter melon soup. You cut a third from the top, you take out the seeds, you use the top third of the melon and the rind attached. Boil with chicken stock, add some white fungus. It took all day to make that goddamn thing. And the only thing he said was, "There's not enough salt." In 48 years of marriage, he never complimented me once. Sometimes I get up in the middle of the night to paint. In the morning, I take the painting to my therapist. Girls flying kites, on the hillside, doves and other birds ready to fly. "What does that mean?" he would say. "It's just birds," I told him. "I like their music." "And kites? I think they're pretty." "Do you want to be able to fly?" he said. "What do you mean, fly? I can't even drive. My husband was supposed to teach me. He'd take me over to the Jean Harvey School and let me drive in the parking lot. You can't even go more than 10, 15 miles, it's so small." That went so far. That went on for that way almost 2 years. And one day I asked him, "Isn't it time to practice driving on the road?" He said I wasn't ready yet. After 2 years. I was so mad. I stomped on the accelerator and the car shot across the parking lot, and then I slammed on the brakes. And I got out and I walked home. That was it. I never drove again. I loved oil painting though. But I only did one. So I stopped. He didn't like the smell of the paint. Tom didn't like that, so he wouldn't let me paint anymore. So I stopped. 7,742, 43, 44, 45. I went to Sunday school in Isleton, Presbyterian Church. And one time on a field trip to Sacramento, the church had a giant organ. Oh, I heard that sound and thought, that's me. So I set another goal for myself. Learn how to read music and to play the organ. My neighbor Stuart, he taught me. I don't think I could have done that in China. It's different here. Civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. A lot of that rubs off. No matter where you are, you hear it on the radio, the TV, in the newspapers. Be yourself. Think big. Live your dream. That's the American way, right? Everybody wants the Hollywood story of Locke. But that's not how it went. Thousands come over from China year after year. Single men, young men, old men to work in the fields, the canneries, and send money home. A lot of them came over with nothing. And 40, 50, 60 years later, a lot of them still had nothing. Not even a flea. Opium wars, revolution, famine, Japanese invasion, Civil War. Chinese went everywhere to get away from all of that. Imagine crossing the ocean, giving up your motherland and finding this. 12-hour days, carrying a 12-foot ladder around in 100-degree heat. You couldn't bring your Chinese wife, and you couldn't marry a white woman. So what did you have? Big Phi Chow. He came over when he was 10 years old. His family sent him to make money and send it home to China. He wanted to go to school and learn English, but he had to work. $1 a day. It's hard to save money when you're making $1 a day. Plus, they liked to drink and gamble too. Then he got really sick. Old mostly. Nobody to take care of him. I used to check in, bring him soup or noodles, whatever I had. Once towards the end of, and I was in his room. All these buildings upstairs and rooms like this was for the workers, $5 a month rent. You had a bed, a table, a single light bulb. I was helping him get dressed one time and I found 10 or 15 little heart-shaped bottles in his drawer. What are these? Gifts for the girls, he said. Bottles of perfume he took up to the whorehouses and stocked.
Single beam of light shines down on bench.
Wong Yao. Now his father came over before him. They shared a room up here on Main Street until his father went back to China. Wang Yao saved enough money to go back to China and get married. He couldn't afford to bring his wife over here, but he sent money back to her to live on. He worked for years as a handyman on the Leary Ranch up past Walnut Grove. He was a favorite of the Leary children. They called him King Yet. He fixed their bicycles and did other things that their father wouldn't do. And finally, under some new immigration laws in the 1960s, he was able to send for his wife and 2 children to join him in Locke. 33 years after they were married. But after she got here, she was run over by a garbage truck backing up to her house. 33 years she waited to come and gets hit by a garbage truck.
Second beam of light shines on bench.
I interpret a lot for the people of Locke. I take them to the doctors, I collect their rent for the Locke family. That's how I learned I had so much more than they did. I had a husband, I had children, a home. I could speak English. I used to go with the old men to their dentist appointments. I translated for them and provide moral support. But sometimes they would squeeze my hand so hard I'd come all black and blue. They didn't speak English, so whenever they got something in the mail that looked official, they got scared and come to me. I helped them make doctor's appointments, answer their mail, pay their bills, register for Medicare and Social Security. It's something I did all my life. They didn't have anybody. Sun Sang. Now he was a very sweet man. He was 28 when he got here and never learned English either. You got to learn languages when you were younger. He joined a labor union and was part of a big strike down in San Jose. A lot of people ask, why didn't the Chinese stand up for themselves? But we did. We did it quietly through hard work. Ping Li went to Berkeley, and a lot of kids went there on Sacramento State and Stanford. They became architects and dentists, doctors. We fought back the best way we knew how, by making something out of our lives. What else could we do? We learned to eat sadness, show the world only the light, not the darkness. We saw what could happen if you got on the wrong side of things. I was there when the bus came to pick up the Japanese people from Isleton. We were the last generation who grew up under the Exclusion Act, so we knew anything could happen. Nobody wanted us here. Nobody cared what we thought about anything.
Third beam of light shines on bench.
I was born with just one good eye. I don't see well. But after the men die, I see them. Yeah. The ones who lived in these buildings sitting here on these benches, almost none of them made it back to China. They were stuck here. And a lot of their spirits got stuck here. You know, I see them out here a lot. They have nowhere else to go. Well, everything changed in 1952 when they repealed the Alien Act, the Alien Land Act. Chinese could finally buy property. But the Locke family, they still didn't want to sell the land. So people began to move away. They didn't want to own just a home. They wanted the real estate that came with it. And nobody wanted their children to do the same kind of work they did. So they moved to Sacramento, Oakland, LA. The discrimination was still pretty bad out here. I guess it was pretty bad everywhere. My brother Bill, for example. He graduated #1 in his pharmacy class at UCSF. But he still couldn't find a job because he was Chinese. As a matter of fact, 4 out of the top 5 students were Chinese that year. 4 out of 5. And that became an issue. They tried to keep it quiet. My poor brother. He fell in love with a German girl when he was over there for the war, but the army wouldn't let him marry her because he was Chinese. He finally ended up filling in for a pharmacist at Dr. Green's Eye Hospital in San Francisco, and he did so well. They fired the pharmacist and that they had, and they made my brother a partner. They didn't care anymore if he was Chinese.
4th beam of light shines on the bench.
These men, they didn't have anything. One old man was hired by a rancher to ride a horse day in and day out, up and down the fields to chase birds away. For $1 a day, it was affordable and more effective than using scarecrows. And there was a whorehouse next to Wali's that burned down. And that, well, after that, it was an empty lot for years. Until a homeless guy, Walking Jim, we called him, put a garden in with plants from the river. And today it's a memorial to all the single men who lived here, who built the railroads, who built the levees, who planted all the pear trees up and down the Delta, who built the town of Locke. California is the richest state in the whole United States today. Why? Because the Chinese built the agriculture here. This was my dream. I fought really hard for this, so did everybody in town. We raised the money selling these plaques. Grocers, ranchers, teachers, artists, everybody gave us money to honor these men.
In memory of the industrial Chinese pioneers of California, whose strength and sacrifice helped build the transcontinental railroad, construct the levees of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, and develop agriculture in the Central Valley. With determination and perseverance, the Chinese built the town of Locke and continue to shape California.
I went to Rio Vista once and saw they built a monument to a whale that got lost in the Sacramento River. But no one ever built anything for the Chinese before. This was the real story of Locke. There were the guys who gambled and drank and worked. They lived in labor barracks out in the fields, worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and their one day off, they came into Locke. They got their hair cut, their shoes repaired, picked up their mailware, being kept it for them at Dailoy. I'm really proud of that park. 8,677, 78, 79. But remember remember my #1 goal was to buy the land under my house and help preserve the town of Locke. And finally, 50 years after they repealed the Alien Act, we did it. I heard that the town was being condemned because we have a sewer problem and a water problem. When I heard that, I said, I've got to go to the Board of Supervisors and make something happen. So I went up there and talked to Don Natoli and told them they can't condemn the town of Locke. Locke is registered in Washington, D.C. It's an official historic town. I know we have a problem here, but you have to save the town. And they did. Sacramento County bought the land from Clarence Chew, then subdivided it and let us buy the land under our houses. The day I signed that deed was the happiest day of my life. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. And then I started taking care of all the old men because it just seemed to be the right thing to do. They didn't have anyone else. I knew where they lived and what they were going through. I feed them, I cook meals for them, I bathe them. I wash their clothes and change them. Then one by one, they started to die.
Fifth beam of light shines on bench.
There was this one guy, Henry said. I took care of his uncle when he got intestinal cancer and colon cancer. I fed him and undressed and bathed him and wiped his ass. And I buried him. For 10 years, Henry, his nephew, insisted that I take some money for doing that, but I refused. Then later he gave me a check for $10,000.
Sixth beam of light shines on bench.
One of the men I took care of, he died here in his room, and I called his son to say that his father passed away. I went to the funeral in San Francisco. But when I got back, I saw him out on Main Street. Yeah, it was a hot night. I couldn't sleep, so about 11 o'clock I decided to go out and take a walk. You know that bench outside Diary Museum? He was sitting right there. I walk up the street, and there he was sitting there. And he nodded his head, and I nodded back, and I called his name, but he didn't say anything. And he got up and left. I came home and I told my husband, I just saw Hoiki. And he said, what do you mean you just saw Hoiki? He's dead. And I said, that's what I mean. I just saw him.
Seventh beam of light shines on bench.
I think they're all still lonely. I think they come back because I took care of them. There's nothing more I can do for them, though. I try and tell them that. But I was all they had in Gold Mountain. They called me Mama, Locke, Mama. They were all my children. 9,915, 16, there, Oddfellows Cemetery in Rio Vista. They wouldn't allow us to be buried there because we're Chinese. I talked them into selling some plots on the side. I'd like to say I started a little Chinatown out there in that cemetery. When the old men died, I passed the hat around. I raised money for them to have a headstone, some way to remember them. They buried the Chinese over near the road, but then they ran out of land, so they started mingling the plots. It's sad. There was no one to say goodbye to them. They never saw their children grow up. In China, they were always crying, please, you will take care of me. And I did. Even to this day, I still go around there and put flowers on their grave. I think I'm the only one that remembers some of these men that die, and I bring flowers to them on Father's Day. Then Thanksgiving, Christmas, I take flowers to them all. I think I have 35 people to put flowers on. My family is buried there too. My parents, my brother, my husband, and my in-laws down there. I don't know how I did what I did. I think I was able to do a lot of things because I was a woman. A lot of these men would have been beaten up pushing the way I did. But I didn't care. What were they going to do to me that hadn't already been done? Eating sugar sandwiches, going to segregated schools, dealing with discrimination. You know, Chinese people are very proud. It's not easy getting them to tell you the truth about the hard things. You never want to show other people your weakness, even me. Some men have done some terrible things to me. And some men have done wonderful things. The key is to forgive. Don't take it with you. They've already hurt you once. Don't let them keep hurting you. Just forgive them and be done with it. When people are nasty to you, it's about who they are, not who you are. Why should I worry about what they think? Worry about what they think. They don't know anything about me. They just hate me because I'm Chinese. That's stupid. So I forgive them, all of them. The politicians, the people who wouldn't sell me my land, my husbands, my parents. I forgive them all. There's nothing wrong with me. Well, maybe these eyes and my arthritis. And the fact that I'm dead.
Beams of light flicker, then lights appear all over the stage.
You know, you look back, everything could have been different. I could have been a stenographer and moved to Sacramento. I could have married the right man and lived happily ever after. But one thing I could never change was the fact that I'm Chinese.
Lights begin to go off one by one, leaving only Connie and the mannequin lighted.
You know, there's lots more to tell, but it will have to wait. Like when Tommy's great-grandfather was murdered by an Irish mob and thrown into the river. Or Earl Stanley Gardner came in town and hung out with me at Yin Chong Market. Or the big reunion when I stayed up all night and made 2,000 almond cookies. At the end of his life, my husband was in such bad shape, he couldn't get up the stairs. That's where our bedroom was. So every night, I put him on my back. Like this. I put him on my back, and I carried him up every night for a year. 9,998, 9,999, 10,000 steps. And when Tom died, I was free to go after my goals. I got them all, except for one. I never learned to dance. The one I really wanted to learn was the jitterbug. It looked like so much fun. I wasn't here for the first speech, but this is in honor of Jeff and Connie, the playwright and our superhero. So now we have, I'd like to have actually the people who are related to Connie stand up. And then there are a lot of people here from Locke, and if they could stand up. Maybe not a lot, or who just grew up there. So now I think we have a panel, right?
Yes, we're going to
We
try.
have a panel,
Yes.
so it's a time for you to think about what questions you would like to ask, and they will introduce themselves.
Okay. These lights are pretty bright, so.
So we were supposed to have a stand, a mic for
Oh. So should we, well, I'm James Motlow. I'm the co-author of the book Bitter Melon that Jeff and I did together. And we've got a mic set up. And Sylvia Sun-Minnick, and please tell us about your fabulous book, Zinfao, and the story of the Chinese in the San Joaquin Delta.
Maybe I can shout. Can you hear me?
Not everyone.
Good.
Oh, we're going to have to wait. We'll get this mic here in just a moment. Yeah, special discount price, $20 for here. So the question I'm going to pose straight off is, what did you think of this, being women and Chinese?
James, hold up.
Okay.
You have to have audio.
Oh, sorry.
I think I may have how many mics do you have? You have 3?
No, we're going to bring one that you can
Oh,
pass
okay.
back
Yeah.
and forth.
Yeah, because can everybody hear me okay?
No.
Great. Yeah, I thought so. I can project.
All right, so why don't you first introduce yourselves?
Okay, well, as I did, I'm James Motlow. I'm the co-author of the book Bitter Melon, done with Jeff Gillenkirk, who wrote this fabulous play about Connie King. And 2010, I moved back to Locke, and that's where I reside now. And I actually live in Connie's and Tommy's old house.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay, yay, yay.
We'll wait for Sylvia here.
Thank you. Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. So just speak into it.
Okay, you can hear me now, can't you? Thank you. I'm Sylvia Sun-Minnick. I live in Stockton, and I fell in love with Locke because I'm a historian, and I found out that the beauty of Locke is actually the beauty of the people that live there. Pure, innocent, hardworking, and that also depicts Connie. I know Connie from being on the Locke Management Board. I know Connie because she made wonderful almond cookies. I know Connie because she will give you the shirt off her back for anything that you would like her to do. She was an extraordinary woman. You know what's so special about her? She never really whined. She always saw the positive. And she was able to, how would I put it? She was able to make Locke a great place for people to come, and she was able to share her story, which Jeff Gillenkirk did a marvelous job. And Jeff was really, we lost a good friend when we lost Jeff. I'll pass this on.
Hello everyone, my name is Eileen Leung, and I currently serve on the Locke Foundation Board of Directors. The reason I became involved in Locke is that my late husband, Peter Leung, had written a book called One Day, $1, in which he had interviewed many of the Chinese residents of Locke through an oral history program, and he had gotten their stories written down in English and Chinese. And so thus began our family's love affair with Locke. I'm a volunteer docent in Locke, usually there almost every Saturday of the month. I give tours. I work with publishing the quarterly newsletter, and I'm generally a Girl Friday there, keeping everything operating. And the boarding house is now a wonderful visitor center, and we have thousands of visitors every year, including school children, especially fourth graders who are learning American history, and the teachers bring them by the busload to visit Locke, and I help to share the stories with them.
Are there any questions? Should we start there?
Does anybody have any questions? Oh, okay. I see a hand right here. Yes.
Could you say something about the burning of Walnut Grove, which made it necessary when all the other fires that happened that drove Chinese out all over California, how they came to get the property of where the location of Locke is now after Walnut Grove burnt?
Sure. Did everybody hear that question? The core question is the founding of Locke. The 1915 fire that happened in Walnut Grove that made it possible, in a sense, an opportunity for the Cheongsong group of Chinese who were living in Walnut Grove to then move a mile north to the town of Locke, which wasn't a town then. The property had been purchased many years before by George Locke Sr. as an investment. He had come out to California in the 1860s, and in the 1880s he brought the 480 acres of the Locke property. Then in 1915, the October 1st, I think it was, something like that, the town of Walnut Grove caught fire. The Chinese, Japanese, and somewhat Filipino section of the town burned down. So there was actually a group of Japanese who had approached George Locke to actually to do what the Chinese wanted to do as well, was to build a town there. But George Locke decided to negotiate with the Chinese rather than the Japanese. And then that was he agreed, it was an orchard there. He agreed to take out all the trees there and start building Main Street. And so that was really the beginning. And what was truly unique, and one of the things that makes Locke so unique, is that the Cheongsong group, who were essentially the minority of the Chinese who were speaking a separate dialect, the Seiziep, if I understand it right, were the majority of the Chinese living in Walnut Grove. And there was conflicts between them. So the Cheongsong group moved to and negotiated with the George Locke to tear out the orchard and make the town. And that's how the town started. Does that answer your question?
Well, it's just that because of the racism and the economic depression after the gold, after the railroad and the agriculture, there were at least 400 incidents in California where the Chinese were driven out. So they were driven out of Walnut Grove.
I'm going to pass this on to Sylvia, who's the fabulous historian here with this.
I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself as a historian. I wrote this book called Sanfo, the San Joaquin Chinese Legacy. I know what you're trying to say, and I have to admit, yes, there were Chinese that were driven out of various cities, but in the issue of Locke, they weren't really driven out because of racism. I think the division of Locke actually was because of the different, how do I put this? You know the Hatfields and the McCoys. Take it from that point of view. So you have the Toisan people, the Seiya people, and then you have the Heungsan or Zhongsans as they call themselves. And even in those days, the Zhongsan and the Toisan should not marry. That's sort of the Hatfield-McCoy stuff. And this is how Locke was developed. It was actually developed because of the Zhongshan people that went there. They actually, today, you know, not even today, 20 years ago, they melted together. That's because they all have black hair.
Right
I was
here.
going to say white hair now. But I do not feel that there was that much racism within the division between the anti-Chinese sentiment in the Delta as much. If there was any division, it was actually because of the Japanese. From what I understand, there is today a museum that the state parks furnish, but it was a Japanese boarding house. And the Chinese never stayed there, even though they were Chinese workers. It was mostly exclusively the Japanese and the Filipinos. So even then, if there was any division of race, it would have been the Chinese and the Japanese. And that's understandable given what happened in World War II. I think there are some of the feelings was quite associated with it, even in the small community. Eileen, you want to add?
Well, I wanted to say that even in China, the Hongsan and the Seya people had conflicts. And so when the Walnut Grove, Chinatown and Japantown burned, the Zhongshan people decided they wanted to form a Chinatown of their own. So that is why they asked Mr. George Locke for permission to build on his ranch. Now, another interesting side point is that Dr. Sun Yat-sen, I'm sure you all know, the father of modern China. In 1911, he helped the Chinese overthrow the Qing dynasty. Well, anyway, in the early 1900s, 1905 to 1906, he came to California to raise money for the anti-monarchy move. And especially, he visited the Delta towns of Isleton, Walnut Grove, Rio Vista, Cortland, and Hood. And there he found the sympathetic countrymen who were eager to help him out by buying patriotic China war bonds. Even though they were not rich, they were patriotic, they welcomed him. If you go to the Boarding House Museum now and the Isleton Museum, you will see a lot of pictures of the Republic of China military visiting these towns because they knew that their countrymen were here. And the people in Locke, Chinatown spoke the same dialect as Dr. Sun Yat-sen. So they were very friendly to him. And likewise, enemies of Dr. Sun Yat-sen who were trying to assassinate him in California couldn't find him because he hid in the farmhouses along the Delta where the Chinese people safeguarded him. So that's an important tidbit of history you might want to know.
One of the other stories that I had heard about this boarding house museum was that because it was a Japanese-owned building, the Chinese of the town said it was okay for that building to be there because they considered it to be outside of town, even though it's no more than from there to there. And so, but it was okay because it was not in the town. So, another question, anybody else? Yes, please.
On a much lighter note, I just want to know what the Chinese called the town of Locke. They didn't call it Locke because it was named after George Locke. They had a different name altogether. Can I have a little story on that?
I'm going to pass this on.
Well, actually, the Chinese are really skilled in putting a lot of thought into very few words. So in order to transliterate Locke, Mr. George Locke's family name, they named the town of Locke in Chinese, Lejü in Mandarin, or Locke in Cantonese, which is very meaningful because Locke means happiness, and Gui is residence, so it's a happy place in which to reside. And so, when Chinese translate names, they always find a very good meaning to the name, in addition to making it sound like the original English term that they're trying to transliterate.
That's great. Yes, please.
I grew up in Sacramento, and in the 60s I would wander around Locke, and when I really loved the vegetable gardens.
Uh-huh.
Are they still there?
She says that she wandered around Locke in the 60s. I'd be very curious to, did you go to the Tules and such? Go to there for music and such? No, okay. Oh yeah, the gardens have changed. They kind of, when I lived there in the 70s, they were very active, as you could see by some of my photos. They went through kind of a deterioration in the 80s, and then they really started to deteriorate mostly in the 90s and such. But beginning in 2005, 2010, we've really brought them back. There's a community garden still. We have a little community park. But we do have a Chinese demonstration garden that is sponsored by one of the members of the Locke Foundation, Stuart Wathau. And he does a great job of showing what was traditionally planted, the bok choys, the donquas, the sequoias, and so forth. And so, yeah, we still try to keep that spirit alive, but it's not like what you experienced back in
Tell them about the toilets.
in the 60s. Well, yeah, Connie started a famous toilet garden along the side of her house many years ago. She said it was originally started, and it causes some amusement because I feel like, Connie, I don't know if you have this story right, but she's always said that she started this toilet garden because some hippies were taking out the toilets in the town, and they said, well, Connie asked them, well, why are you doing this? And they said, we don't want to sit on these toilets. The Chinese sat on these toilets. And we kind of go, there was a group of us who were living there, and we had been very supportive of the Chinese, and we did numerous projects around the town. And in fact, one of the opening stories of how my involvement with the town was that I was asked by one of my elderly neighbors to redo her bathroom, which I did. And so I did this work during the day, and then in the evening she and her husband would fix me dinner, and that really began a very crucial relationship for me and Locke. So Connie, that was the story that she would tell. So, okay. But she developed all that, so people would start dropping off toilets, and she would put succulents in them along the side of her house. And at one point, the entire side of the house was filled with these toilet gardens. And then after her passing, we moved them from along the side of the house over to the Chinese demonstration garden. Anything?
How many people have been to Locke? Great.
Wow.
How many people have gone back to Locke? That's the beauty of all this. One of the things is you've got to see this toilet garden. I bring our visitors there, and they just sort of shake their head and laugh. But then now, besides the demonstration of the various vegetables, they've built a hen house.
Yes, we got
I
chickens.
understand they have chickens, and I understand that some of the members of that community not only look for the eggs in the morning, but they have to divide it up, right?
That's right.
Jim?
Eileen, would you wish to say anything about this?
I don't know anything about
Oh,
it.
okay. Actually, I'm going to use it as a time to pitch the Locke Foundation, because Sylvia brought up how many of you have gone to Locke. It's really, really important that you stay involved with the history of Locke. There's a number of things that are going to be affecting the possibility of Locke's longevity, which are primarily the building of the twin tunnels. If that goes through, and they're proposing to have an intake valve at the cross channel, which is less than a mile away, and another one a little further down, maybe a mile and a half away, there are going to be trucks going by, potentially, this is all written out in their plan, to have trucks going 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, hauling dirt. They said in these plans that 100-year-old buildings will not be able to sustain this damage to them, the sheer vibration of this. These will go on for like 2 or more years. Locke is, again, if that happens, it's the end of Locke. So, but aside from that, and hopefully we're going to stop that, it's just the sheer aging of the town as well. We need people to become involved. Come to Locke. Help out the foundation any way you can. Particularly if you're of Chinese heritage, get your kids involved, because without their involvement, history will, the town, I'm concerned that in 10 years from now, the history of the town will crumble and the buildings will be gone, and all we'll have is like my book or something, which would be a sad thing. So, another question?
I think we have to stop.
Oh, we do.
So thank you very much. They'll be available to talk to afterwards, but thank you so much for coming. I also want to thank Katie Kleinmaster, who's been wonderful in making this happen as well. Thank you.